you. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcy. Mr. Woodward, welcome to San Francisco.
Thank you.
Is this your first time here on this book tour? On this tour?
Well, I've been to San Francisco many times.
Many times, yeah.
Never enough.
Thanks. So I want to start off with this book. It shattered first week sales records at Simon & Schuster. As Marcy said, you've written 19 of these books. Were you surprised by the commercial success right off the bat?
No, it's really not about the book or me. It's about Trump. And Trump is a magnet for, because people, I mean, just talking with people here earlier at a reception, they are electrified, perplexed, and distressed.
Fearful.
And yeah, fearful. And I mean, the title of the book, Fear, came from Trump. And 3 years ago, a young reporter at the Post and I were interviewing Trump, and we kind of figured, well, he's not going to be elected president, so we'll ask serious questions and take the high road. So we talked about power, because that's what the presidency is really about. And Obama had said, he was president at that time, Obama had said, well, real power is not having to use violence. And so we asked Trump, what's real power? And it was almost a Shakespearean aside, like Hamlet turning to the audience and saying, this is what's really going on, and this is what I think. And Trump said, real power is, I don't even like to use the term, but real power is fear. If you do, as I was able to do 2 years of reporting, that's his way of operating. He scares the bejesus out of everyone, and the closer they are to him, the more distress they have about the way he's conducting the presidency and his policy-making process, which in a way doesn't exist, because his idea of policy-making is, can I ask the audience a question?
You can ask any questions
you want. How many people have a to-do list? You know, where you, okay. 2 years of work, Trump does not have a to-do list. No, it's all impulse, it's all the moment, it's what's on television. And so the tragedy is, if you think about this, presidents can do really great things for this country. They have over the centuries. And this is a time of a kind of peace and a kind of economic prosperity, and good things could be done. But with Trump, and so the book opens with Gary Cohn, the economic advisor to Trump. Cohen had been the very successful president of Goldman Sachs, and he lifts a paper off Trump's desk because he realizes Trump is ordering the withdrawal from the South Korean trade agreement, which will trigger potentially an unraveling of the relationship and the very top secret program to detect North Korean missile launches. And Cohen was traumatized and just, you know, I'm going to take it off his desk. Of course, Trump didn't notice. And I mean, it would be really interesting if you could have a time-lapse camera in the Oval Office of what
there
comes
might be
to.
One.
Yes, there might be one. That's right. Nixon never thought of that. And you know what comes on his desk, what gets signed, what disappears, because this is a routine policy. Now, the paper I referred to when the book came out, Trump denied, said, oh, Gary Cohn would never do that. If he did, I'd fire him. In the book, I print the document that was lifted from the desk and the folder that Cohen put it in. Of course, that is replicated in the book on page 9, and Trump did not get that far in the book.
You know, that part, it's a prologue. The Cohen anecdote is a prologue to the book, which then goes back to the campaign.
Yes.
And when I was reading it as an editor, I thought, oh, good, he led with the good stuff first, and then he's going back to the rest of it. Why'd you break that out at the beginning as a prologue?
Oh, I knew you were going to re-edit the book. Because it's action, it was not known, it symbolizes the breakdown, the nervous breakdown of executive authority, and it not only involves Gary Cohen, but Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and Secretary of Defense Mattis, who Cohen asked to go see Trump and say, you can't get out of the South Korea trade agreement because it will be a catastrophe. So you have a series of players, you have action, and I actually had the picture of the memo in the folder, and I remember putting it in the book and going, ha, he can't deny this. But of course
Spoiler
he did.
alert, yeah.
Yeah.
So some people have called this book a bookend to your first book about Nixon. Do you think that's a fair characterization? And you have outlined in the book some differences between what's going on with the Trump administration and the over-conflation of that with Watergate.
Yeah. First, you have to go back. What was Watergate? And Watergate was actually an attempt to subvert the process of nominating and electing presidents in 1972. It wasn't just a burglary, it was dirty tricks, wiretapping, all kinds of things. And there were a series of wars that Nixon conducted against the anti-war movement, against the press, 17 wiretaps on White House, Nixon White House people, or directly on reporters, a war on the justice system, the cover-up, and in the end, Nixon's war against history to kind of deny it. And it was Senator Ervin who ran the Senate Watergate Committee who asked the question, well, why Watergate? And he said it was a lust for political power. And I think that's absolutely true. I think this is the overlap with Trump. I think Trump, who knows something about lust, also lusts, you're grimacing. Okay, you
it's a JCC.
You're supposed
this is a G-rated conversation.
Okay. Oh, wait till we get to the good stuff. But that there is something about Trump and his run for the presidency which has not been fully explained. It's almost like he was well known, he was a celebrity, and so this is the next big thing. I think I'll run for president with no concept, no real interest in the history of the office and the mechanics of governing and the responsibility of the president. And so it was again one of his impulses. And I think one of the failings in the media that we have, and I in particular, is understanding the psychology of it for Trump. How many people here have been elected president of the United States? None. Not even you.
Not by the popular vote,
yes,
at least.
Yes, right. And, but Trump has, and he did it in defiance of the party and of the odds and the traditions and the political inexperience. So he got to the White House by himself, and I found And there's scenes in the book of, he's talking about some issue, and cabinet officers will say, "Where did you get that idea?" He said, "Well, I've had it for 30 years, and if you disagree with me, you are wrong." And so Trump is, there is something that in doing books about 9 presidents, I think all presidents are isolated. I think Trump, the most isolated by far, in a very dramatic way. And people, it's what George Kennan, the father of the containment strategy in the 1940s, called the treacherous curtain of deference that just falls down when people get in the Oval Office. And I've had people, White House aides in all presidencies, cabinet, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell the president the truth. And then they melt and fade. And so, and as we know, Trump likes praise. And so anyone who challenges him is, I mean, now Kirstjen Nielsen, the head of Homeland Security, is out. And it's Trump just, I'm going to weed out anything that isn't perfect. And of course, nothing is perfect. So we talk to people in the White House and say, "Do you think your job is in jeopardy?" And they burst out laughing because they know their job is in jeopardy, always.
One of the themes in the book that I got out of it is that he seems to surround himself with these people who are, on one hand, sycophantic, and on the other hand, they know that what's going on is not normal, but they kind of put up with it anyway. Is that everybody that's working in the administration, or is that just the people who are talking to the press?
Well, I found people who weren't talking to the press in the detail and the luxury of time. You could hear about things and then find people who had diaries and documents, and so you could lend and present an authoritative explanation of how, for instance, Trump decided to levy steel tariffs. I mean, did it all on his own. His chief of staff, his economic advisors didn't know, and he called in the steel executives early in the morning and then just said steel tariffs are imposed. And as almost all economists will tell you, that actually makes no sense, that the trade deficits with countries like China and in Europe, Trump is obsessed with, they actually help the American consumer. And people have tried to tell him this, and he just will not listen. So it's isolation, and it's Reince Priebus, who was Trump's first chief of staff, didn't last long. But I quote him in the book saying it's not a team of rivals in the Trump White House, it's a team of predators. And he says and then he goes on, there's a snake and a hippopotamus and a gorilla and all of this is the chief of staff. That it's not Nancy Pelosi saying that it's a team of predators, it's the person who's supposed to be. So I'm quite frankly more and more alarmed as I get into reporting for a possible second Trump book.
Everybody's scared of what the second Trump book will say. Do you remember the first time you met the president?
Yes, it was in the 80s. I met Trump, and he had just published his book, Art of the Deal, and my colleague at the time, Carl Bernstein, said, we've got to go meet Trump. And he'd run into Trump, and Trump is just, and this is the way he is, and he said to Carl.
So this was in the 90s?
No, the 80s,
the 80s.
Like 87, 88 or something. And Trump said, you and Woodward have to come up. and talk to me. Just think of it, Bernstein and Woodward and Trump. And Carl said,
just rolls
you know,
off
we
the
have
tongue.
to do this. And I said, why? And he said, well, let's do it. And we taped the interview, and I'm embarrassed to say I lost the tape. Like Nixon. I mean, it was just kind of, where's the tape?
Was it like a tape recorder tape or a
Yes,
video
yeah,
tape?
yeah, it was. Huh. And I've offered to people who work for me $1,000 cash reward if they find
Maybe you
the
could
tape.
ask the Russians.
Yeah.
They might have it. But what was it like when you finally met him?
Well, I mean, he was, you know, it's art of the deal, it's bluster. I was saying tonight at the reception, I think this bluster and tweeting and his whole public persona is a disguise for what he really is. He's a showman. He likes the show, and he regrettably has too little interest in governing. And you know, that's the job. From doing 9 presidents, I've asked myself this question: what's the job of the president? And my answer is, the job of the president is to figure out what the next stage of good is for a majority of people in the country, not a base, not one party, not interest groups. But we could put up a board here. We say, this is the next stage of good. These are the things the country needs to do. And in 2 years of work, it never comes up with Trump. I mean, that's the real tragedy, that with all this power and all this focus, and I honestly don't think he gets up in the morning and thinks, how can I screw up the country or screw things up? I think he is just, it's all about him. And that is dangerous when you get into some of these foreign policy issues and confrontations.
So let's talk about the Mueller report. It exists now. We know it exists. We
Right.
have a summary of it. Do you think the full thing will ever come out?
I have a copy of it in my suitcase back here. Would you like to see it?
I would like to see it,
A
please.
San Francisco
Yes.
Chronicle
I can
exclusive.
finally yell, stop the presses. I've always wanted to do that.
Would you do it?
Absolutely.
What?
Yeah.
And then suppose there was sensitive stuff in there and you got a call from the
Oh,
attorney
man, now it's a
general.
journalism.
What?
Ethics. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and,
you have to verify
or
it.
the
You're right.
FBI director said, you're jeopardizing national security, Ms. Cooper.
Sunday
And
night.
we're asking that you not publish. What would you do?
I think there are probably things in that report that are counterintelligence information that probably
Yes.
should not be printed.
Yes, I
Ever.
agree. I agree. But then how do you stop the presses? And, you know, a little bit impulsively,
maybe my story's
I think.
about why
I
Mr. Woodward
mean,
has
you
this
can't say,
report and
well, there'll
hasn't
be
done
no
it.
Chronicle for 5 days while we figure out what we can print.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah,
It's
it
hard.
is.
And I think some of the Barr 4-page letter has been misunderstood because it very clearly quotes from Mueller's report saying he did not find that the president committed a crime, though we did not exonerate him. Well, the not finding a crime, that's what the investigation was about, and that's, if you're Trump's lawyer, you're celebrating, you're breaking out the champagne. And I mean, Giuliani, I'm sure, is, you know, going through emotions that even he has never gone through. And so it's a trauma. I don't know, did you find people at the Chronicle were shocked that there was this finding in the Mueller report? No collusion and...
Yeah, I think there was some surprise. And then in retrospect, it seemed like we shouldn't have been surprised. I mean, we don't we don't cover that level of day-to-day Washington
Yeah.
stuff. We're primarily local, but I think there was an expectation that we would have some basic questions answered that a lot of us have, and that doesn't seem to be the case yet.
Yes, and it's been reported, I think, that there's some damaging material, but Trump dodged this, it seems, at this point. And I think a lot of people are traumatized by the fact, because there was an expectation this was going to do in the Trump presidency. I think in my business, the media, though I think my newspaper, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, NBC have done a great job covering Trump, because you had to cover the firing of Comey and, you know, all of these things that took place. But there is some people have become emotionally unhinged in our business, and I think that you need to hand out Valium gargles to people to just kind of.
Do you think the media overall has handled the release of the Barr report, at least, well?
No, because there's a lot of people cover it and say, well, Mueller didn't decide the obstruction issue, but when Mueller said we didn't find a crime, you know, that Mueller's not doing all this work to write a magazine profile. It is a criminal investigation, and when you find no crime, that means you've got to move on, but there's no exoneration, so hopefully we'll see something in the report.
You mentioned the Southern District of New York.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is a question. Is a lot of this material going to just be used for state charges?
It could, or more
in New York.
importantly, and whoever is in the audience, I think that was my brother who shouted out the Southern District U.S. Attorney in New York. Mueller put lots of cases over to him. That those investigations go on in that office of the U.S. Attorney in New York has a real tradition. Giuliani had that and they're very aggressive. And so I'm not suggesting it's over, but I am suggesting that this is the great problem in journalism. Sometimes you just have to look at the facts, and it's hard. It's hard in this emotional climate. Katharine Graham, who was the owner, publisher of the Washington Post, after Nixon resigned, sent a private letter to Carl Bernstein and myself. In fact, she wrote it out by hand on legal yellow pad, and Bernstein got the original, and I got a Xerox. And it said, it's a great letter. And it was supposed to be private, but she published it in her memoirs. You know, you can never trust publishers. And it said, okay, now you two, you did some of the stories, Nixon's gone. Now don't start thinking too highly of yourselves. And let me give you some advice, she said, and the advice is beware the demon pomposity. And the demon pomposity stalks the halls of the media, politicians, business, you name it, and it is an infection that consumes lots of people. And I think it's a mistake. Too often we become, and it looks like I'm a Republican senator I know quite well, and I was saying I'm worried about my business, the media, that we're too involved and too judgmental and not empirical enough. And he said, oh, don't worry about your business at all. almost everyone has written the media off as just another form of politics. That's not good news. If we are perceived to be another form of politics, that's not our job. And we've got to get back in that lane, and that entails lots of work, I think.
So you mentioned the reporting of national classified material. Clearly, you must have run into some of that when writing this book. Are there things that you decided?
Never enough.
Never enough.
Right. Yeah.
Were there things that you decided not to put in the book?
No, I found I was able to publish in some form a lot of classified information and NSC notes and National Security Council notes, because I think it's really important to deal with these things. I think to me, the most shocking part of it was Trump is on this he's on the case of, oh, we're spending all this money in our military alliances, NATO and South Korea and around the world. And he said at one of these meetings, which is highly classified, he said, why are we doing this? This makes no sense, and we are suckers. We're paying for Germany's defense. We're paying here and there. If we were smart, we'd be so rich. And this was a meeting Trump had been president 1 year. It wasn't his first week. And so Secretary of Defense Mattis feels he has to answer. And he says, Mr. President, we're doing all of these things to prevent World War III. Now, that the Secretary of Defense has to tell the President that we're doing things like this that really have kept the peace to prevent World War III. What's job one of the President? To prevent World War III. Chilling and, quite frankly, frightening.
Do you think the administration has changed since the Mueller report has come out?
Well, let's see. I mean, the Mueller report hasn't come out. Well, we have
it's come out to the DOJ.
Yeah, but it's, you know, you always discover that there's more to the story, right?
Yes.
Every time, even at the San Francisco Chronicle, I'm sure after a couple of days of a big story or something, you say, I wish we knew that then, right?
That's why we call it the first draft of history instead of the second or the third.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, I think, you know, my brother had it right, his way of saying this is not over. And it's hard to be patient. Don't you find yourself, you know, impatience and speed? The internet, give it to me, summarize the news. My God, don't write a 5-part series on land use.
We may have done that once or twice.
Okay. Rightly so.
Yeah. So let's talk about the actual way you go about your reporting, which is what I'm so fascinated in. And I think a lot of people in the general public are really interested now in how investigative reporters do their job. You have a note to readers at the beginning of the book that explains the principle of deep background. Do you want to explain what that is?
It means I interview people on deep background that I'm going to, and I tape recorded all these interviews with people with their knowledge, and it means I can use it, but I'm not going to say where it came from. And people have guessed sources. One of the facts is that 3 of the best sources I had for this book, their names never appear in the book. And quite frankly, is over the last 10 or 12 years, I've re-examined my process of reporting. And it was the 4th Bush book. So 10 years ago, there was a general who wouldn't talk to me four-star general. And I sent messages, phone messages, intermediaries, radio silence. So I thought, I'm going to use the old Watergate technique of going, knocking on the door. So I found out where he lived. Now, when would you go visit a four-star general without an appointment?
Well, I should say I know how the story ends. So.
Oh, okay, you do.
But
okay, so we'll disqualify you.
Yeah.
Okay. Some people will suggest the morning, and I'll say, stick to your line of work because you don't
Well, I'm
want.
glad I didn't answer it.
You don't want to interfere with the general's physical training, and so it turns out the best time to go is 8:17 at night on a Tuesday.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, you were going to say. Because you don't want to go on Monday, and you don't want to go at the end of the week, and Tuesdays are perfect. 8:15, 8:17, if the general's home, he will have eaten. Maybe he had a few pops. Relax, those are the extra hours, so I go knock on his door. And can I quote him?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. He opened the door and he looked at me and he said, "Are you still doing this shit?"
What'd you say?
Well, it was sincere. And from lots of CIA reporting with people who are CIA case officers, they tell you it's important to let the silence suck out the truth. You just have to learn to be quiet. I have a little technique of sticking this finger into my little fingernail so it hurts, and it's a memory aid to tell me to shut the F up. And listening. And so I did this, and I poker-faced, and he looked at me, and he got a disappointed look on his face. I think not in me, but in himself, because he said, "Okay, come on in." Sat for 2 hours and answered questions. Now, why? Because somebody showed up. We're not showing up. I'll bet you find reporters. I asked a reporter some time ago, well-known, I said, "When you go out for interviews?" And he said, "Oh, no, I don't go out for interviews. I do."
Don't say it.
I know, you must hate it.
I hate it so much.
Yeah.
They email.
Right.
Email's everything.
You send the White House a query by email, and then 4 assistant press secretaries sit around the computer, say, "How can we write 2 sentences that say nothing?" And that's what you get. You get a bleached out, laundered version, or, this telephone sometimes can help and sometimes is necessary. You've got to show up. It takes time to show up, and you get lots of no's. But when I was working on Fear, there was for me personally, an important fork in the road moment. It was 11 o'clock at night, and I had the home number of somebody in the White House who was key. And I said, "Oh, should I call him? 11 o'clock at night, that's late." And then I thought, "Oh, well," at this point I was 74 years old. I said, "Go to bed. You should go to bed." And I'm out of nothing other than momentum. I had the number, and there's the phone, and I dialed. And he answered, and I said, identified myself, "Would like to come talk to you about the Trump White House." And he said, yeah, you call the office tomorrow, the brush off. And I said, "Well, I'm 4 minutes from your house." I said, 4 minutes from my house? How do you know where I live? And I said, "Well, good research." And so he said, "Okay, come on by." And so at 11:04, I showed up at his door, and luck in anything. His wife was out of town. And I stayed. It wasn't dawn, but it was almost dawn. and then went and got some sleep and came back the next morning. And you've got to get into people's homes. You've got to, if you're the Assistant Secretary of Defense, and I come to interview you, what are you thinking?
It would be a 4-letter word.
Okay.
And it would start with O.
Okay.
No, I don't want you coming to my house at midnight to
No,
interview me at all.
not in your office at the Pentagon. I start easy.
What do people? What's the reaction you
Okay,
normally get?
what are the most potent? I call you up, and I want to interview you. What am I going to say to you? What are potent words in journalism?
I have a source.
No.
I have a document.
No.
Oh,
See?
this is like going to college again. What do you say?
The most potent words in journalism are, I need your help.
Yeah.
I need your help. Because it's true. And it immediately, if you start, I got the goods on you, I've got the document, I've got, that's bad human interaction, I think. But I need your help is honest and works. And so you say, okay, come on by the Pentagon. Now, I'm going to not just Google you, but I'm going to find out a lot about you. And I'm going to have the article you wrote for Defense Weekly 32 years ago. And I'm going to say, on page 18, you say the following, and you might think, I thought only my mother read that article. And it's not a ruse, it's something I want to know. I want to take you as seriously as you take yourself, right? You take yourself seriously. So by showing a genuine interest in who you are and what you think and then what you know, maybe you're a backbencher in the White House sitting there taking notes, and if it's useful, I'll ask to come back, and then one week I'll call you at home and say, we didn't get to meet on Tuesday at 8:17, but can I come by? And you may say no, you may say yes. And what the formula for dealing with Trump people, the closer they are, the more anxiety and distress they have about what's going on. And so if you can find those people and develop that relationship of trust, you have a chance of getting diaries and notes. And you've looked at the book. I quote endlessly from notes and diaries, and the Secretary of State sent this memo, and this is what it said, and so forth. And
there's also a lot of dialogue.
Pardon?
There's also a lot of dialogue in
right.
the book. That's, when we put something in quotes, we're pretty sure that's exactly how it was said.
Yes.
And there's a lot was dialogue in this book.
Yes, there is. There's less than people think, because I paraphrase, and then people will say, I remember exactly what was said, or here are my notes. People in the White House, it's a moment in the sun for them, and there's some things you remember, and people take documents home at night, and they'll always deny it. And on about the fourth interview, I remember one person said, I want to get the date of that. Do you oh, well, maybe I have something upstairs. And so he goes upstairs, and he came down. Boxes. And, if the FBI ever got those documents, I was drooling over them because they're so significant. Building blocks of authoritative journalism, but none of these things are perfect engineer's drawings, but what we call the best obtainable version of the truth.
So you recorded all of these interviews that you did. Where do you keep these tapes? Are they in a secure place? I mean, I imagine a lot of
What
people...
would you recommend?
Well, this is why I asked that question, because once, when I was in college, I had to interview Thomas Oliphant, who was a Washington correspondent and a columnist with the Boston Globe. And he told me under his bed, he kept the recordings and notes and documents of all the stories that he could never totally prove. And I thought, that doesn't seem like a very secure place to keep all of that stuff. And given that a lot of people would like to get a hold of these tapes, are they in a secure place?
Well, one thing, there's not enough room under my bed. And I worried about this, and but it's one of those things. It moves on, and people knew it was true. Too many, I've had too many people say, "Oh yeah, of course that's true," and that fits. And I was there. I remember doing one interview about some discussions in the Trump White House and talking to somebody who was there, and I said, I understand this happened and this happened, and this person, very prominent position, said, I didn't take notes, but that sounds exactly what happened. And as you know, in court, they'll let people go in and say and testify, and they'll ask under oath, what did he say? What did she say? What happened? And it has the power in a courtroom, and you can, again, having time, ask other people who were there. And the diary. If you worked in the White House, you'd keep a diary, right?
Absolutely.
And do you keep a diary as editor of the Chronicle?
I do.
Stop the presses.
I have a memoir folder on my email. I do? I do. I think someday that's going in the memoir.
Really?
Yeah.
Does the staff know this?
Well, they do now.
You have a reporter?
Yeah. So, you're no stranger to the fake news slur or accusation. It happened during Watergate. It happened even with this book and this president.
Yeah.
How do you think the discrediting of the media has changed over the last, or has it?
Yeah, it's the old Nixon strategy. Nixon did the same thing and would say, send Ron Ziegler, his press secretary, and say, this is, they were not as skilled as Trump is. They didn't have the term fake news, but it was, we're character assassins, or we make things up, or the sources are a fountain of misinformation, whatever that means. And Trump has now a high-tech, well-calibrated version of making the issue the conduct of the news media rather than his conduct. And he sold lots of people on it. And that's where we have to, in our business, kind of calm down, be more empirical, and find a way kind of back by just being factual. Facts, facts, facts. They really do matter.
Do you think that it's possible to restore faith in the media to where it was at the height of the Watergate reporting?
I think the truth emerges, and these are accurate accounts of Trump, and now people don't want to deal with it and so forth. I wrote something out. I read to you because I wanted to. This struck me. I was in Los Angeles, that suburb of San Francisco.
I've heard of it.
And last night, and a friend of mine I had dinner with, and who worked at the Post for years, and he said, "Don't lose sight that journalism is a moral pursuit." And he said, "Now it is a moral pursuit, but it can't be moralistic or self-righteous." And he said the job of journalism is to locate truth, fairness, empathy, find a voice for the people who have less power. I agree with that. I think that's true. I know we make lots of mistakes. I make mistakes too often, but this work is done in good faith. And that's gonna Trump's charges, whatever he doesn't like, he will say it's fake news or we're the enemy of the people. I have known thousands of journalists. We're not the enemy of the people. And we have a product that lots of people don't like and don't trust. And so what we have to do is make the product better, like anyone.
Yeah, well said. So recently, Congress has been getting into the issue of helping the media. We have a proposal out there for a Journalist Protection Act, which would make it a federal crime to attack journalists. And then there's also...
Right. Now, that's how many votes it would get in Congress. I mean, is this a joke? No, okay.
And there's also the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act that would allow smaller outlets to join together and get rid of some antitrust rules and allow them to negotiate with Google and Facebook. What do you think about Congress trying to give the media a leg up on anything?
Well, they do so many things so well. No, thank you. I just don't. But, you know, again, you've got, and may I just tell, this is a little bit of a long story, but it's something that's lived with me for a long time. And we try to get the facts, and then we try to take the facts and what we've seen or reported and say, this is what it means. And that's what we often get wrong. And there was this goes way back, it was September 1974. Gerald Ford was president. Nixon had resigned in August. And Ford, president, maybe 30 days, and he went on television on a Sunday morning announcing he was giving Nixon a full pardon for Watergate. Now, I think Ford went on television early on a Sunday morning hoping no one would notice, but it was noticed, but not by me. I was asleep, and Bernstein called me up, woke me up. Carl always knows how to say what occurred in the fewest words with the most drama. Said, "The son of a bitch pardoned the son of a bitch." You wouldn't allow that in your newspaper, but it did convey the message. And I was proud of myself for a while because so that's what happened. And I thought, it's perfect. The final corruption of Watergate. Nixon gets a pardon, and Ford gets the presidency. There was an aroma of a deal. It was denied, but it was too cute, right? And I would have staked my life at that time on my conclusion that this was corrupt. And then 2 years later, Ford ran against Jimmy Carter and lost, largely because of the pardon and the distrust. So 25 years later, after 1974, so it's 1999, 2000, I undertook one of my book projects, Shadow, about the legacy of Watergate in the presidencies of Ford through Clinton, and called Gerald Ford up. And I'd never interviewed him, never met him. At the time, in the 70s, there was a big poster in the news conference room of the Washington Post that the classified ad department put up. Remember when newspapers had classified ads?
It was before my time, honestly.
I believe it. I believe it. And it was a picture of Jerry Ford saying, "I got my job through the Washington Post."
When you called him up, did you say, "I need your help"?
Yes, I did. And figured he would, and said, "I want to talk about the pardon figurine." Now, this is 25 years later, 23 years after he'd left the presidency. And so we set up interviews. I had the luxury of time to 2 full-time assistants get all the memoirs, contemporary coverage, 7 interviews with Ford. He had a home in Colorado, one in Rancho Mirage, California, and I would write drafts and then go see him. In the last interview, I remember he had a little den in his 1-story house and a tape recorder going for history. And I said, asked, why'd you pardon Nixon? And he said, oh, you keep asking that question. And I said, well, I really don't think you've answered completely. And to my astonishment, he said, you're right. I haven't even told Betty, his wife, this story. But history should know what happened behind the scenes that was very secret. And he said, so a week before Nixon resigned, Al Haig, Nixon's chief of staff, came to see him, Ford. Ford was vice president at that point in August. And Al Haig said, look, if you agree to pardon Nixon, he'll resign, you get the presidency. And I'm sitting there and I go, holy shit, there was a deal. And I said this to Ford and he exploded and said, there was no deal. I tell you, I knew that that would be corrupt. And more importantly, he said, I knew Nixon was finished. I was going to get the presidency anyway. Anyone offer you a deal and say, oh, you're going to get something you know is going to come your way? And I said, but why? What happened? And then he went on this monologue that was so interior about what he'd kept and the nature and the state of play. And he said, I became president, never wanted to become president, wanted to be Speaker of the House. That I was president and the economy was in trouble. It was the middle of the Cold War. He had a letter from Leon Jaworski, who was the Watergate prosecutor, saying we're going to investigate Nixon as a private citizen. Because of the tapes and the damning thousands of hours of secret tape recordings, surely will be indicted, tried, convicted, maybe go to jail. So Ford said, so we're going to have 2 or 3 more years of Watergate. And he said in this plaintive voice, I needed my own presidency. The country needed to move on. It was essential. And he said, as president, I realized I had some, just not ancillary duties, but I had a prime responsibility of what is in the national interest. And we had to get Nixon off the front page. And he said, I was haunted by everything Nixon. And we had to get Nixon into history, and I had this pardon power, and so I exercised it. And I did it, and what I believe, and he said, I knew I was going to get slaughtered politically, and I could never disclose that Haig had come and offered a deal, because then there'd be investigations, and so I acted preemptively in what I thought was the national interest. I wrote in the book Shadow that, in fact, what Ford did was quite gutsy. Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of the late President John F. Kennedy, called me up and said she and her uncle Teddy Kennedy had read this in the book. And she said, each year we give a Profiles in Courage award to somebody in politics named after her late father, the late president. His book, Profiles in Courage, about 8 politicians who killed their own political careers by doing what they deemed in the national interest. And so they gave this award to Ford. I didn't go, but I watched it. It was televised. There was some video of it. And what a cold shower for me. What, to be fully honest, how humbling, how humiliating to be so wrong. Because in 1974, as I said, I would have staked my life that this was corrupt. Then you look at it afresh through 25 years of history, go at it patiently, know that the key is one person. Gerald Ford keeps showing up and saying, what happened, really, why? And what I was sure was corruption turns out to be courage. You can't have that experience in our business and not live in a state where the pause button is always on. That, gee, we think we know, but we maybe don't. And so when Trump was elected, I knew it was a pivot point in history. Dropped all work for the Washington Post, some other projects, got off television, and went into the night knocking to try to find out the best obtainable version of the truth from people and from their documentation, because I knew I had better not wait 25 years before doing that story in that book.
Well, I think that's something I wish everybody knew, is just how much journalists live in fear of getting something wrong like that.
And not understanding, and this is, the business, that the barriers are within yourself. You have to really, young journalists will come, what do you think? And I said, if you're supposed to work 8 hours, work 12 hours. You like to hear this, don't you?
I do, but it's
Yes.
illegal unless
It's
we pay
illegal.
them overtime.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. The union says no.
That's right.
Yeah, but the editor smiles, right? Somebody
I think
comes
it's
in
time
and
to
says,
take audience questions now.
Jones here is working too hard. What are we going to do about it, right?
We thank them. All right, now I could ask you questions forever, but it's time to take some from the audience. So there are people along the side with some, if you want to step into the aisle, it would probably be best. And come on down.
We're going to start on this side, over here.
Good evening. You spoke about that the report, the Mueller report, found that there was no criminal violations, shall we say. However, you didn't quite address the role of Congress in terms of what their obligation is and how that relates to the Mueller report. And even though they didn't find Trump guilty of a crime, there's other findings that Congress has a duty, really, to look into as an oversight body.
Yes, and the Democrats in the House are aggressively going after Trump's tax returns. I think that's very important. I think if we had the Trump tax returns
I would
here,
like to see those too.
you'd stop the presses,
Yes.
right? Right, and just hear, yes. And all of the other issues that Democrats are going to look at, I think that's important. But something happened in Watergate, and that is, John Dean, who was Nixon's counsel, testified to the Senate Watergate Committee for 4 days, laid out meeting after meeting with Nixon, where Nixon ordered obstruction of justice, payment for the silence of the Watergate conspirators, and it was stunning at the time, and people and Nixon denied it, and people said, well, wait a minute, and then the tapes surfaced, and so you had high quality evidence, and that's critical. I don't know how the Democrats are going to get something that Mueller didn't get. And what happened, this idea of high crimes and misdemeanors morphed into, in the Nixon investigation, are there crimes? Well, in the case of Nixon, there were an abundance of crimes. The follow-on scandal, Iran-Contra, there were not tapes, and no one proved a crime. In the case of Bill Clinton, there was, again, all kinds of denial, and no one, maybe there was a crime, he didn't tell the truth in a civil suit and so forth, but he was not removed from office. So the question I think that everyone's going to be wrestling with for the next 2 years is do the Democrats, or in the Mueller report, do they find something that is so damning? But I don't think it's in the Mueller report, because Mueller said it's not, if Barr quoted correctly. So you're going to have a lot of political skirmishing, and who knows what the outcome is. My interest is, what does Trump do as president? I have in the book a lot of information about the confrontation with North Korea, Kim Jong-un. And as you may recall, Kim Jong-un said something in a public speech somewhat early in the Trump presidency. He said, "I have a nuclear button." And of course, Trump's immediate response with the tweet was, "My nuclear button is bigger than yours." And then they discovered through intelligence that North Korea had mobile missile launchers and more nuclear weapons than initially they thought. And so the danger was growing, and so Trump reversed course, as he often does, and had the first summit with the North Korean leader, and the North Korean leaders promised he would get rid of, Trump says, and I get there's some evidence that Kim Jong-un said, "I'll get rid of my nuclear weapons," and everyone in the intelligence world said, that isn't going to happen, because the nuclear weapons in North Korea are, it's the leader's stature and it's his leverage. If you were advising Kim Jong-un, would you say, "Oh, give up your nuclear weapons"? No, that's the big, a very big deal. So then Kim said, "Oh, well, maybe I'm not going to give them up," and there was the second summit, and it fell apart and collapsed. I know from current reporting, this is Kim Jong-un stiffed Donald Trump, and if you learn one thing from Trump's history, don't stiff him. And there are a group of people around Trump, I call them the goaders, who actually believe that it would be a good idea to issue Kim Jong-un an ultimatum about his nuclear weapons, and you could trigger a war. And I describe a situation in the book where one of Trump's tweets, or was getting ready to tweet, almost started a war, and absolutely gave people in the Pentagon who knew, they almost had a heart attack over it, because Trump was going to withdraw the civilians out of South Korea. The civilians, spouses, and children of the 28,000 military people, and a back-channel message was sent to the White House on December 4th, 2017, saying, from the former foreign minister in North Korea, who was the mentor to Kim Jong-un, and he said, "If you withdraw these people, it will signal that an attack is imminent." And the Trump tweet never went out, thank God. And so, anyway, we are in a dangerous situation. I don't think President Trump like a number of presidents, don't really understand the consequences of war.
We have a question over here on the right.
Hi. We understand that you're not a psychiatrist. However, you've spoken with him, you've written about him, you've met him.
I can't quite hear you. Can
Oh,
you?
sorry. Yeah, I'll say
Yes.
it again. Sorry about that. We understand that you're not a psychiatrist, and we're not asking for a psychiatric diagnosis, but you're observant, you've met with him, you've written about him. What would you assess his state of mind to be? Is he crazy? Is he crazy like a fox? Is he losing it? How would you assess him psychologically as best you could?
That's not my brother. Easier to describe the creation of the universe.
23andMe. I am your brother.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You know, happily, I'm not a psychiatrist, and the mysteries of psychiatry I do not understand. What I do really, I think what's happened, Trump has been president for 2 years, and he will come up to the edge on things like he's going to close the border. I mean, can you imagine closing the border? Everyone was telling him it would be a catastrophe. And so he reverses course. But he, as I said, he just doesn't really think about these things. He doesn't really think about the next stage of good for a majority of people in the country. And it's all kind of what comes into his mind or what's of the moment. That is, you would, people, you wouldn't run your lives, you wouldn't run your businesses, you wouldn't run your newspaper the way this is. And I mean, suppose you came in, suppose you had a big Twitter account. Do you have a Twitter account?
I'm huge on Twitter. Yep.
You are?
No, it's not.
Okay, you're not.
I don't think it's as big as yours.
Okay. Suppose you just got up at 3 a.m. and said, you know, we're abolishing the Metro staff and we're all going to do music criticism, right? And you're the boss, and well, imagine. I talked to the people in the White House, and they're traumatized just to go to sleep because you never know what's going to come up, and you know that is not a very sound way to run the operation. And so we were in New York, talked to real estate people who dealt with Trump. Now, Trump had 6 bankruptcies. Anybody here have 6 bankruptcies? Anyone know anyone who had 6 bankruptcies? You have to work at it to have 6 of them. And the banks didn't like to do deals with him, and one of the bankers I talked to, and I said, what was it like? And he said, well, we all said we're not going to deal with Trump, but then sometimes Trump would own a property and would want to expand it and get a loan or something. And so he said we would do the loan, but we would structure it so Trump could never get at the cash flow. And we called dealing with Trump the Donald risk. And now the Donald risk is not just in New York real estate, but in the whole country. And this idea of operating this way, I worry about it because I know and I hear and see the details. And time again, he just does not comprehend. And so, you know, what are we supposed to do? Again, it's like psychiatry. I don't do the political remedy, but don't kind of think, and what I think has seized the public imagination, oh, that's Trump. So, you know, that's what you expect. Well, that's not what we should raise the bar on him.
Next question on your left.
Mr. Woodward, when Ms. Cooper said that she would stop the presses if the Mueller report was released so she could publish it, and you said that the national security people would call you and put enormous pressure on you, and then what? As I recall, your paper did indeed get immense pressure to stop publication of an issue that would supposedly involve national security, the Pentagon Papers, and they published. So what is the rationale why Ms. Cooper shouldn't publish under the same circumstance?
Yes, well,
I think your point was I shouldn't do it in an hour.
Pardon?
Your point was I should not publish something in an hour. Not that you should never publish anything.
No, but you have to weigh it, and what you do, you go to your sources and you say, what about this? In the Obama administration, I was doing the first book I did on Obama's wars, and went to see the CIA director, and said, these are the 10 things I have in the book that might give you gas pains. And so we went through them, and we got to the last one, and he said, the last one, he said, if you publish that, we could lose a war. And I got a little tight and said, really lose a war? And then he made the argument, and he said, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll weigh it, I'll consider it. And somebody in the CIA then said to me, and this is the world of Washington and politics, said, well, if you don't publish that, do you trade? Really, we'll give you something better or equivalent, and you can publish that, but not this. And I thought, well, is it something about we'd only lose half a war? And this is taking place in the CIA, and you wonder, there are video cameras and microphones and so forth. But I have been in situations like this, and I think you would agree, you cannot trade. That is absolutely forbidden. And I said no, and this aide to the CIA director said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll weigh it and I'll let you know. And I did not publish it because the argument was compelling. You do not. I've been in situations where people have said, if you publish this, you get someone killed. You will jeopardize operations, and you, as a reporter, you never want to do that. And I've CIA, White House, Pentagon meetings about this, and you listen and always are more aggressive than the people who have government power, because I think, if you ask me, what's the thing to worry about the most? It's secret government. Vietnam, Watergate, so much of the trouble we've had because of secret government, and we need to be as aggressive as we can. But if I came to you, if I was working for you and I said, I have this story, and the CIA director said, we're going to get people in the Pink Starling operation or whatever it might be killed, what would you say?
I would probably say no. We should. It's really hard to weigh that, but I think at the end of the day, you want to do more good than you do harm every day.
Yes, and getting, we were talking about, and this is where some of it's gone off the rails, but we want, it is, we're interested in the truth and justice and fairness. And if people are going to be killed, we don't do that. And we should not do that, in my view.
We're going to take one last question. I want to invite folks to the atrium immediately afterwards for some dessert and coffee and to continue the conversation.
Yes.
Hello?
Hi.
just wondering what in your career has come close to the experience that you had with Watergate?
What's the?
What experience in your career has come closest to your experience during Watergate?
Well, in Watergate, because we were alone and working on the story, there's see, we wrote these stories essentially outlining what Watergate was and the extent to which it reached into the Nixon re-election committee and the White House and the president. And it was, people didn't believe it. And Katharine Graham, the owner of the Washington Post, publisher, had invited me to lunch in January '73. She'd supported the publication, and I knew her a little bit, but I went up to this lunch, and it was, she really blew my mind with what she knew about Watergate, because she's going through asking questions, and she said she'd read something about Watergate in the Chicago Tribune. And I remember thinking, what's she reading the Chicago Tribune for? No one in Chicago does. That's a cheap shot. Let me take that back. But she was scooping up everything, had a management style. I don't know whether you subscribe to this, Audrey, but a leader, a manager has to have mind on, hands off. You have to know everything that's going on, being intellectually involved. But you can't tell your reporters how to report, or you need to know what's going on. She had that management style, but she also was a killer in terms of asking the CEO question. And she said, so, when is Nixon won? 49 states after we essentially outlined the scandal. And she said, when is it going to be proven? And I said, well, because now after Nixon's won so handily, we go see people and knock on their doors at night, and we get most doors slammed in our faces. There was a cover-up going on that was organized. The Watergate conspirators were being paid for their silence to obstruct justice. That the FBI investigation was being curtailed. And so I said, Mrs. Graham, the answer to your question, when's it all going to come out, is never. And looked across the table, and she had this pained, wounded expression on her face, the look you never want to see in your boss. And she said, never? Don't tell me never. I left the lunch a highly motivated employee. But what she said was not a threat. It was a statement of purpose. And she said, we believe our sources. This involves the President of the United States. So she said, we have a triple, maybe quadruple responsibility to get to the bottom of it. And so redouble your efforts. Do anything that is necessary, because, and this is our obligation. And then she said to me, she said, why? Why do you think? And I didn't know. And she answered her own question. She said, we do it because that's the business we're in. We signed up for this. And I left that lunch, I was 29 at the time, just lifted up that the boss understood the risk, was willing to assume the risk herself, and put the newspaper behind it in the way she did. And so someday, we are going to put in the lobby of the Washington Post, even though the Grahams don't own the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. But even, we're going to put a plaque in, and we're going to drill it in so even he can't get it out. And it's going to simply begin, a quote mark, never, don't tell me never. End quote. Katharine Graham, January 1973.
Well, that's an excellent way to end the conversation. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and I think I speak for everybody that we're very much looking forward to the second Trump book.
Thank you.